All right, last time we saw that you could use an intent to launch a new activity. What we're going to do today is extend the whole idea of using intents further to use extras. Right, so here's our situation. In our menu, we have lights out, and default is 7 buttons. So what we'd like to do is to be able to pass that 7 over across into the intent, where we're going to be changing the number of buttons here. And so that it actually is going to default to that 7, for instance, whatever we passed. And then when they change it, say they change it to 9, then we want to pass back that 9 back to our menu here so that it then says play with 9 buttons. And of course, the next time that we go to change the number of buttons, if it says 9 here, then we want this here to display that 9 so we can choose something else. Right, so what do we want to do? We want to pass this information back and forth. And the way that we do that are going to be use extras. So we put an extra in to go one direction and get it on the other side out. And then if we're going a round trip where the whole purpose of creating another activity is to get a result, then we're going to see another couple methods here that we can use to do this. Okay, so the whole idea of an intent, and particularly an extra, is pretty simple. All an extra is just a key value pair. So in our example, we wanted to pass the number of buttons, right? So that's just an integer here, and it just with the value of the field that I had set. So we need to give this a key, and we'll probably generally use a key that starts with key underscore, and then something else that makes sense here. And we're going to use a constant for this, since we're going to need to refer to that key from both sides, from both activities, right? Like we said, we'll put it in, and then on the receiving side, we'll get it out. As far as what that looks like in code, it's very, very straightforward. So let's go there, take a look at an example. Okay, so creating a key, super simple. All we're going to do here is define a string constant, and then you'll notice that in between creating the intent and then starting the activity with that intent, we're just going to be calling on the intent. We're going to say, hey, put an extra in here with that key and value. And it's really as simple as that. Looking ahead here a little bit, on the receiving side, what's going to happen is in our other activity, we'll just be getting it very straightforwardly. We're going to have to extract out an intent, and then from that, we're going to get the extra. In this case, we know what type it is with the same key, and then we'll give it a default value just in case none were passed. Right now, we know that one was passed, but this would just be in case it wasn't, and we can do whatever we need to with it. So let's go there in code. Okay, so here we are in MainActivity, and we want to make a string for this guy here. So let's see, we don't want to make it private because both need access to it. So default will work again here. So we'll make a static final string, and we will call this key for the number of buttons. And as far as what value you give it, it doesn't really matter as long as it's unique. I tend to use the same thing as the name of the constant, just because I'm not very creative there, but that's perfectly fine. Okay, so let's go ahead and do the other part. So inside, here's my intent to change the number of buttons. I'm going to go ahead and take that intent, so my change num buttons intent, and I want to put, and you'll see there's lots of extras that could be put, so they're overloaded for all sorts of different types here. So I'll just pick one. Put extra, and then I need my key, so which is my key num buttons, and then the value that I'm passing in is the name of my field here. So let's see about my number of buttons in a field. So I should probably go ahead and make one here. So we'll say private int my num buttons, and we can even have that default to 7 the first time that we run our app, and then we'll pass this guy in. Okay. All right, so it's going to start the activity with that extra data. So let's go to the other side. So we'll go to the ChangeButtonsActivity, and inside here, here's my onCreate. So when that activity is created, I want to pull it out. So I need an intent. So the intent, I can call it really whatever I want here. I just have to get the intent. And so every activity has a get intent method. So I'll call that. And then if I take data, then I can get the extras. Now get extras are a little bit different here. They actually have a specific extra, so get whatever type extra. So mine is going to be an int here. So you see that there's a few different ones that are close. So I have just an int extra, and the name is going to be the key, but that was defined back in the other activity. So let's hit MainActivity.keyNumButtons, and then the default value for the thing that I'm pulling out, I could set it to 7. I want to make sure this doesn't fail, so I'm actually going to set it to -1 just in my testing, and it should be okay. And I'm going to set this equal to a field here just called the number of buttons. All right, so what do I want to do with this? Well, we want to check the correct radio button in the group. Okay, so how do we do this? Well, we need to get our radio group first of all. So let's go ahead and capture the radio group. So radio group equals not radio button, but radio group. Find view by ID. r.id dot, and I should have one for the radio group. Oh, very good. So I have the group, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it, but it depends on how many buttons I have, what I'm going to do here. So let's make a little switch statement here on the number of buttons. And I'm going to have, it's either going to be 3, 7, 5, or 9. So let's see what we can do here. So radio group dot, and there's going to be a method here if I look for check, and check, as we see, is going to set the selection to the radio button whose identifier is passed, right? So so that's just going to be the ID of the button. So let's go ahead and do that. So check r.id dot, and then this is the radio button ID, right? So radio 3, and then I'm going to break out. Okay, go ahead and probably make a couple copies of that for 579, 579. We'll go over here, 579. All right, and we'll go ahead and test it. All right, my emulator came up here. So let's see. So let's try to change the number of buttons. And what we're hoping is that the 7 here, there we go. So the number of buttons here is 7. All right, looks good. So I wanna make it so that when I click 5, so that it actually goes back. So let's catch the slides up. Okay, so there's our bit about the radio group as far as what we did there. Nothing special. We just basically checked the right thing in the group. All right, so passing things back is a little bit more complex because what we want to do, instead of just starting the activity, we want to start it for a result. And we're going to have to pass it in a request code here. And this is just if you had an activity that was calling maybe a whole bunch of different activities, it wants to know when it's done, well, which one finished, right? So in fact, when it finishes, it's going to call this callback here on activity result, and it's going to pass in the same request code that it was launched with, right? And then we'll use a result code for whether it was okay or not, or whether it was whether there was some kind of problem to show. And then of course it's actually going to pass back the information itself, the data. All right, so what does this look like? When we start our activity, we're going to have to go make some changes. So we're going to start it for result, and then we're going to have this request code as well. Request code is just simply another constant, right? Only this time it's going to be an integer. And I'm just always going to call it request code, and then basically the intent that's going to be launched. Doesn't so much matter what we use for a value. Again, we're striving for consistency here. So let's go take a look at this guy in the code. All right, so in my main activity, let's go ahead and start activity for result. And if we look at this here, so we have an intent and then we have a request code. So let's go ahead and put in a request code here. So request code for change num buttons. All right, and we need to make a constant for this, so I'm sliding back up top here, and we'll make this guy. This actually can be private because it's only this activity that's going to care about it. Static final int request code change num buttons equals 1. All right, and this guy should be able to launch and launch up the other intent. So let's go ahead into the other intent here, into our main activity. Into the change num buttons activity. So it's going to get the information here. Now what we're going to need, of course, is a way to get stuff back. So back to the slides we go. All right, getting things back is actually pretty straightforward. You're going to be creating another intent to pass information back. You'll be putting some information into that. So let's just say, for instance, that they actually clicked radio button 3. So we just want to put the 3 back in. So we can reuse the key from before since it's still just for the number of buttons. And we're going to pass in a 3 here in this return intent. And then what we want to do is say that the return intent actually was finished properly, right? So there's a constant here in the activities that's result okay. And then we're going to finish. Now you notice it's this dot finish, right? So we're telling our activity, this change buttons activity, hey, you're all done, go away. And when it does, then it's going to jump the information back to the calling activity, so it'll return there. All right, let's take a look and do those things. All right, so here, make an intent. Call it whatever I want to. Return intent is fine. Return data, anything I want. There's going to be a new intent. And then let's give it the appropriate information here. So return intent, and we want to put extra data. The name, again, is going to be our main activity dot key num buttons. And for this first one, it's going to be a value of 3. That'll break out. And I'll do something similar for all the others. So 5, 7, 9. Make those changes. 5, 7, 9. And then regardless of what we put in, we're going to do a couple things. So let's start off by setting the result here. And we want to set it with with the intent itself. So the result code, you'll notice it even pops up here with some options. Result okay is what we want. And then the second one is an intent, and we know that we're passing back our return intent. And with that, we will finish. So if I want to do this dot finish, or again, the this is optional, but activity, you're all done. All right, and that's going to trigger off a callback back in main activity, right? So let's learn about that. All right, so it's actually this method here called onActivityResult. That's going to be called. It looks actually more complicated than it is. This is technically the right way to do it. We'll take a little bit of a shortcut when we do ours in a minute here. But onActivityResult gets a couple things here. So you recognize the request code. So that was the same one that we had launched it with. So we want to make sure that it is the one that we launched. So we'll have a case for that. We have the result code, and technically we only want to do anything if the result was okay. It's possible that it was canceled. Say we went back, we hit the back button without actually making a choice. Then we don't want this to be called. We just do nothing, right? So we want to check that as well. And then of course there's the data itself that we're going to be pulling out and then doing something with. All right. So back to Eclipse. So back in our main activity. On activity result. All right, and it makes a super call here. Let's get rid of that. And I found that it's pretty simple if we just use an if statement here. So if the request code is equal to the request code that we had defined, and the result code is equal to result OK. All right. If we wanted to fully qualify that as a constant, it's activity dot result OK. All right. So if you really want it, if those things are both true, then we're going to do something with the data, right? So we can take this data here, and we could call its get int extra with our key for the number of buttons, and we'll give it a default value here. Now, again, they really should be passing something back. I could set it to -1, or I could set it to 7 here. What do I want to do with that? I want to set my number of buttons and update it so that I can use it a little bit later. And quite simply, you know, what do I want to do with this? Let's just go ahead and update the text on the play button, right? So play button set text, right? And I'm going to need a string to give it. So let's go ahead and give this here. We'll make a string that's going to be get string, because I had a resource ID for that, or I had a string for that. r.string dot, and that was something like play button the format string, and I can just pass in this number of buttons right here, and then we'll set the text to be that string. Let's go ahead and test to see how that worked. All right, so my emulator came up, so let's go ahead. So we have 7 buttons, so let's change the number of buttons. So we go over to our other screen, it defaults to 7. Let's change it to something else. Let's, for instance, try 3. So we click 3 buttons here, and it finishes, and then it comes back to this guy. And like we were very much hoping, right, it says here that we are now playing with 3 buttons. Now we haven't actually checked the, you know, that actually not playing a game yet, but we wanted to check to see that that information was passed back and forth. All right, so let's go back to our slides and see what we got going on here. So we've taken our information here. I suppose I could have logged it. I chose not to when we coded it up. And then we update the play button text, right? So if we wanted to summarize sort of what's going on here in this case, if you want to get information back from another activity, sort of 3 steps here over time. Number 1, we're going to call start activity for result with some kind of request code. And then the second activity is going to do whatever it needs to. It's going to prepare the information to come back with the data itself, and then any flag that it completed successfully. And then that's going to do the callback here to an activity result. And again, it's using these two constants, just which intent is actually returning, and that's the request code, and then was the operation successful or not, and it's going to be result OK. All right, so that's really that's all for this particular lesson. So we've done 3 of our 4 screens here, only 1 to go, and that's the game itself, the actual lights out game. And I wondered, did you finish your lab from your last lab yet? Right? Because if you did, then this is going to be pretty straightforward. In fact, we're going to extend it, because instead of just having 7 buttons, now we're going to be able to use any number of buttons. Right? That's why we had these updates here. All right? Should be fun. See you next time.